Right now, though, more on the recent failures of the three banks and what they mean to the banking system, our economy, taxpayers. Milton Nasrati is chief economist at Vested. Milton, thanks for being with us.
Pleasure to be here.
So I was looking at a headline earlier this morning that said fears of banking crisis. So let me see if we can clarify it. Are there fears of a banking crisis, or are we in a banking crisis?
Well, certainly for certain banks, it's a crisis, but we are not in a crisis yet. But we could if the fears grow too great. The whole system's based on confidence. If people lose confidence, we're in a crisis. But right now, we are not.
Is President Biden, in your opinion, doing enough to keep those fears from exploding?
Well, the Federal Reserve and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation have made steps. They're the first place. They're the right place. President Biden, to the extent that he's backing these gestures and said there'd be more, is doing the right thing to help restore confidence. Yes.
Let me ask you this, because I was asking this of the guest we had in our last segment. The president has made a lot of saying that taxpayer money not going to help this situation, instead the money to guarantee depositors who are above the $250,000 limit that insurance usually covers, that would be paid for out of fees that banks are paying into the FDIC, right? But in the end, don't we all pay anyway? Because the banks, and our previous guest thought so, but let me get your view on that. He thought that what will happen is the banks will just raise their fees and pass along that to all of us. So at the end of the day, we pay for it.
Well, to the extent that the FDIC calls on the banks to pay more than they otherwise would, what's happening with the FDIC's putting this money out and saying we'll cover more than the $250,000 minimum is it's running down the fund that it has developed from those fees. If they then go back to the banks and ask for more, your other guest is quite right, it'll be passed along. If they don't, if there is if they quell the crisis and there isn't calls on them, then it won't cost anybody anything. Gradually, the FDIC will rebuild that fund with the existing fees.
I also want to kind of bring back a question I asked our last guest about banking regulations. Some regulations were passed after the 2008 bank failures and the Great Recession, that some of which required banks to keep more liquid assets on hand. And then some of those requirements were kind of rolled back during the last administration. Do those need to come back, and do we need other stronger regulations put in place?
Well, given what happened to Silicon Valley Bank and the New York Bank Sovereign, I don't think, given the threat to their deposit base, that there would be any regulation that would have protected them. Unfortunately, the banks are always exposed. The regulations only moderate the risk. So in this respect, I don't think if we'd had stiffer regulations on these banks, it would have prevented anything. There was a lot of mismanagement in both places, but that's a separate issue.
I noticed this morning, and I'm sure you did too, that the stocks for a lot of regional banks took a beating. Why?
Well, people are just worried that there are other problems out there, that other banks have the same problem. Regional banks have been singled out because in both the case of Sovereign and Silicon Valley Bank, there was a concentration in depositors and there was a concentration in their lending, and in regional banks tend to be more concentrated than larger money center banks.
All right, let's say I'm a small business owner and I need some banking done. How do I look into a bank? What do I look for so that I can find a bank that I can have more trust in than these banks that failed?
It's a great question. Well, the FDIC will tell you about how sound their finances are, and that is an on-demand piece of information on their website. You could go there. But if they're public firms, they will issue all kinds of information about their distribution of assets and their distribution of deposits. And you would want to know that the bank you're dealing with is well diversified and there is none of the kind of concentration that befell Silicon Valley Bank and Sovereign.
I'm curious, were there warnings on the FDIC website about Silicon?
There was no warning on the website about Silicon Valley Bank. No special flag. There was information on the finances. You could have used that and the public information as well. But no, there was no warning on the website that I know of.
So isn't that a big failure?
Well, it's a failure to a certain extent. The question is that the FDIC has to work within the regulations, and there is nothing in the regulations that say you can't have depositors who are too big. You can't have a concentration of lending to the biotech area, which was Silicon Valley Bank's problem, and the crypto area, which was more the problem of the sovereign bank.
All right. Thank you, economist Milton Ezrati, for joining us today.